Welcome to another episode of Conversations at the Summit. So on this edition, we're going to be talking about people. People make a business, but how do you look after them and how do you keep them?
Where does a journey start when you're working with an early stage business and knowing to bring you in?
But 10 to 15 years ago, when I sort of started building the practice, the people part of the jigsaw was there, but quite low on the priority list. Whereas now, people is always highest on the agenda because there's an understanding that, yes, you might get your capital in, you might get your IP in, but ultimately, if you don't have your people, you're not scaling. It's not just about ticking a box for legal compliance. It's a much wider discussion, which makes it fun.
Well, joining us, we have got Kim Wedral, Head of Innovate Employment at Mishcon de Reya, and my regular sidekick, the man behind Climb, Gordon Bateman. What does, Kim, Head of Innovate Employment mean?
Yeah, sure. So I'm a partner in the employment department at Mishcon de Reya, which is a full-service law firm. My particular area of expertise is looking after founders that are starting and scaling companies within the innovation space. So hence Innovate Employment.
I see. And where did the love of the law come from?
That goes back quite a way, actually. So I remember being intrigued by the profession when I was really, really young, particularly because I used to watch Judge Judy, which was one of my favourite programmes on TV. And I remember watching her and thinking, I want to be like her. And I associated a legal career with the pathway to getting there.
Not quite where you've ended up. How did you end up diverting to employment law then?
Naturally, when you're deciding sort of where you're going to go with your career in law, you get to experience lots of different areas. And I think it's safe to say that I quite quickly realised that I have a certain skill set which aligns really well with working with people and helping to navigate businesses through how to manage their people and how to look after them and how to part ways with them. So it was a sort of evolution, shall we say, of realising what a career in law actually means.
And what would you say that skill set is?
So I think that there is, a myriad of different skills that you need there. But I think, listening, understanding, empathy are really, really important. And then being able to adapt and modify your approach based on a particular set of scenarios or a particular person that you're dealing with is really important. I think pragmatism is king in what we do and who we work with. Often, within the innovation space, it's about we need to get to a solution and we need to figure out the best way to navigate the risk to get there. But ultimately, that's what we need to achieve. So certainly, I think, lawyers in the space I operate in and the really good ones are the ones who are able to approach it from that perspective rather than just from a sort of theoretical point of view.
It's funny because I often forget you're a lawyer. So, I think see you more like a business person who knows about people and then knows about law. I think your approach to things is very much around looking at it from, I guess, your customer's perspective. And a lot of business owners and business leaders we talk to think that the people side of the organisation is possibly the most important, the toughest thing that they can actually do when running a business, but then can get lost in it. Talk about some of the things that you've been doing support, because you work exclusively with the same industry as the high growth businesses. So
yeah, absolutely. Great. And I think that's probably what has really shaped the kind of approach that I take, to be honest. It's been very much a sort of an evolution and a learning curve working with, the founders, the people that own the businesses and that are growing the businesses, whereby, they don't really want somebody that is just going to advise them on the law. They want somebody that understands their business first and their objectives first, and that will help them to align, the sort of the way that they need to get there in accordance with that. So I think it's been very much a sort of, something I've learned along the way, having worked with people like that. But I think, to go back to the point you sort of raised at the outset of, it's interesting that I sort of approach it from a slightly different point of view. to my mind, that's what differentiates a good lawyer, really, is, anyone can look up the law nowadays, with AI, everything's available at your fingertips, right? It's really about those people that understand you, that build that relationship with you, and that can then help you to mould what you need to achieve from a legal viewpoint with what your business aspirations are.
I was struck by the word empathy that you used, that you need to empathise, because it isn't something you necessarily associate with lawyers.
Yeah, I think that's probably right, and possibly why I was particularly drawn to sort of employment law and that particular area of the law, because you really do have to understand there's different angles to the empathy piece there. There's understanding it from the perspective of the person that you are advising within the business organisation, which will have a particular sort of way they want to approach it, but then also understanding how the individual receiving messages may respond or react or process things. So it's empathy on different levels, and I think that's what really appealed to me, because I've always been a people person and always like to understand what sort of drives and motivates people.
You're scribbling notes there, Gordon.
Yeah. But it's right. I think I agree completely. Is that there's a lot of people saying, professions are going to be replaced by AI, but you can't replace that relationship piece. And every small, particularly in the area that we operate in, the high growth space, every business is unique and different. But one of the challenges that I see is that, and I agree, this is the right thing. A lot of peer-to-peer networking and founders learning from founders because they've been there. But it's bringing in professional support experts, because as a founder, I've got 3 case studies now, I guess. But as a professional, I've got hundreds of case studies. So do you see the same thing of founders? Where do they start? Where does a journey start when you're working with an early stage business and knowing to bring you in?
Yeah, I mean, what's been really cool is seeing how that's kind of evolved over the years, with how, the mindset of business owners has changed in the sort of, giving it away now, but 10 to 15 years ago when I sort of started building the practice, I was talking to founders, boards, VCs, you name it, and pretty much the people part of the jigsaw was there, but quite low on the priority list. It was very much the capital, the IP, everything else aside from people. Whereas now, when I'm speaking to, whether it's your one-man, founder team, or it's a much bigger team, people is always highest on the agenda, because there's an understanding that, yes, you might get your capital in, you might get your IP in, but ultimately, if you don't have your people, you're not scaling. So it's a very different mindset. And so the conversations that we're having and when we're engaging with our clients is probably a lot earlier on, and having a lot sort of more interesting conversations about their wider strategy and where they want to go than we ever have done. So, it's not just about ticking a box for legal compliance. It's a much wider discussion, which makes it fun.
So was it previously you were firefighting? So that they've started off on their own, they've got all that capital, they've built the business, they've brought some people in, and then it's gone a bit wrong, because actually they're not necessarily managers for a start off. That they're innovators, they've got these great ideas, but they're not necessarily managers.
Absolutely right. So I think at the end of the day, it's, it doesn't come naturally. Managing people doesn't come naturally to a lot of people, particularly people that, are incredibly clever when it comes to science or engineering. And you sort of see this, we certainly see trends in some of the companies that we work with where, when they're scaling, they get to a certain point and then they empower their people with, managing other people as almost like a sort of promotion. And I think what gets lost sometimes in that process is that appreciation of, well, sometimes they just don't have the tools, to understand how to manage in the right way. And that's when issues crop up. So yes, certainly historically, but even now, a lot of firefighting does happen in my day to day. A lot of it is reactive. We've got this big issue that's blown up. But 9 times out of 10, if you kind of drill down into the detail, there's been some kind of management issue that has created the scenario that you're, then having to deal with.
And particularly, you work with an awful lot of startups, Gordon. And is that a conversation when you first started out you would have had with them, if you need to think about this? And is your mind shift moved, do you think?
It's interesting because you say about the dynamic. So when we first started doing this, it was similarly. People have a product strategy, they might have a financial plan, that was it, a no people plan. And then we saw a massive swing of this, if you talk to companies like Scale Up Institute, they will talk about this being, it kind of iterates, is money or people the biggest challenge? And then, but more recently, we've seen people think they can do it themselves. And I think needs to be a reminder that I'm terrible at managing people, right? That's not my skill, and it is a skill in its own right. And bringing in the right support at the right time is actually critical. But we are seeing a bit more at the moment because of these peer-to-peer networks being created, people think, oh, I'll just do what Claire or Johnny did. And that's probably not right for their business. Do you see the same kind of thing?
100%. Yeah, still an awful lot of what I do is trying to answer the inevitable question of why. Why should we talk to you? Why should we engage you? Why should we, all lawyers, we don't like you guys, you're very expensive, that sort of thing. And so an awful lot of what I do day to day is sort of building that credibility, those relationships, and getting my founders to understand that actually, if I know what your pinch points may be at the outset, we can work together to prevent those from happening. And that saves you cost, saves you time further down the line. So it's an education piece, but that comes through building their trust and getting to know them and, what ultimately motivates them as people.
But it's important because as a founder of a business myself, you don't know what you don't know. So unless someone draws it out of you, one of the biggest challenges I find in a lot of my own business life, not what I do for my clients, but is that working it out. And you need a professional to pull that from you, to ask the right questions and then drill down to be able to then say, oh yeah, that, you talked about pinch points before. What kind of pinch points do you see in the, when you're at that? What are the things that founders and businesses are talking to you about, or that you're pulling out of them?
Yeah, so it's kind of all sorts of different things, really. So, the outset is, well, what kind of people are you going to need, to get to that next milestone that you need to achieve? Where in the world are they going to come from? What are the considerations that there might be if they're going to be global folk, for example? So, those sorts of conversations, but also, and I think this is particularly sometimes controversial, is talking to them about, okay, think now about what you're going to do if something goes wrong. And that's never a nice message to hear, I think, at that sort of, when everything's rosy and everything's going well. But it's a really important point. And I think having that conversation in the right way at the right time is something that we really try and do with our founders, to sort of build that understanding and hopefully help them mitigate some of the potential risks.
And I guess a lot of them are first-time founders, so they won't even know when it goes wrong, what that actually means, because it inevitably will go wrong.
Yeah, absolutely. And the trick is just, doing that in a way that doesn't scare them too much, because fundamentally no one wants to hear that, you're dealing with this massive dispute between founders, for example. They just never envisage that's going to happen to them. And hopefully it won't. But I think it's about empowering them with the knowledge of stuff they don't know. And I'm often having conversations with founders where they're saying to me, fundamentally, I don't know what I don't know. And I need you to help me navigate that, whether it's in this country or whether it's global.
The tech industry is growing hand over fist. It's where it is at. There's no doubt. When you go back that 10, 15 years, how have you seen the industry change? And how much has it been about getting the right person, and now it's about keeping that person?
Yeah, I mean, it's changed a lot. I mean, obviously, with the evolution of tech at the pace it has changed, we've already seen a lot of companies, for example, laying people off and, things that otherwise would not have happened, the tech evolution has procured. But I think what's been really interesting, and again, I'm no tech expert, but I certainly read quite a bit and try to understand a little bit about the different perspectives that there are, is, how we can leverage the best out of the people that we have within our businesses, but in a way that embraces tech. And I think that's going to be the future ultimately, is understanding how to get the best out of your people, how to align their skills with the technology we've got in our businesses, and how do we get people to stay? I mean, ultimately at the end of the day, you have to understand what's important to them, right? And I think that again, is something which, if I wind back 10, 15 years, it was very much what's the bare minimum that, we have to give these people that we have to do. Whereas now it's very much a case of, well, actually, yes, this is our mission. Yes, this is what we need to stay true to. But ultimately, who are we trying to attract? Who are we going to retain in our business? And let's make sure that we get that bit right. And that's going to differ depending on the people that you need.
And it's not just about the biggest paycheck, isn't it? Obviously, you want to be remunerated, but it's a broader spectrum than that to keep people happy now.
That's absolutely right. And I mean, I don't know if that's your experience, Gordon, but certainly my experience, particularly in the sort of tech, in the healthcare industries where competition is fierce when it comes to who's going to write the biggest paycheck. Often the companies I'm working with, they're looking to take talent from the likes of AstraZeneca or Microsoft or, the big giants. And so they're not going to be able to compete with the kind of, salaries that those organizations offer. And actually, increasingly, that's, it's important, clearly, because people, want to be remunerated well, want to earn a living. But ultimately, it's not the sole motivator. And I think there's an awful lot more stuff that, incoming talent now is looking for from, the business that they're going to join, whether it be what is your mission, what is your purpose, what are you trying to achieve, through to what's your culture, all the way, up to what's your sustainability, focus. All of those things are becoming increasingly important.
It's interesting because we've had other guests on the podcast who talk about diversity, and we talked about how having diversity of thought in a business not only improves your business as an entity, but also from a retention perspective. I think a lot of people want to work in an environment that's engaging and fun. And I see too many founders who think the option or the idea of reducing your salary bill by chucking stock options at it is the answer. But it's not that either, is it? It's more than that, isn't it?
It is more than that. And I think even that we're seeing is becoming almost a given. You kind of will almost offer, particularly as an early stage company, some form of stake to your staff. But the kind of traditional model of that, which was very much time-based model, is also under scrutiny because, what we saw that talent sort of was looking for back 10 years ago around kind of loyalty, I want to stay in one place for a long period of time, has sort of disappeared. People are quite happy to move around and, gain skills in different places and take those skills and transfer them elsewhere. So the kind of traditional models around stock options are also being sort of reevaluated. But I think you're right. It's much broader than that now. It's really what's going to align with those other aspects that are increasingly important to people.
And one of the other things that we've seen more recently, which is probably just post-COVID really, is it's not cheaper for salaries in the north anymore. People used to think, well, we can hire people in the north. Well, now we've got a lot more mobility. If you start paying low salaries to northern businesses, guess what? Those teams are going to they're going to go south if they can get more. So if there's a retention in geography as well is quite key. So, and showing that there's more value than just a slightly higher paycheck.
Yeah.
Retaining people is a lot cheaper than hiring people. We all know that. So working on that is key.
I know. And I think that it's quite interesting looking at it for a moment from my own industry perspective. We certainly saw, for example, those firms that had, presence within Cambridge had a very different sort of salary model from those that were engaging in London. Mm-hmm. And it's probably been a few years now, but certainly all of the firms in the local area were sort of attuned to that and realised that they were losing out on really good talent, and that it almost didn't matter that people were based in Cambridge. It's about the value proposition that they bring, and that drives a certain salary point. So there was a real shift there. And I think we're seeing that across industries now from a geographical point of view.
Big investment announcement by Rachel Reeves not that long ago, and Cambridge was mentioned a huge amount, and the Silicon Valley between Oxford and Cambridge, and Cambridge is where you're based. How was that received? Are you seeing Cambridge just booming and that evolving? Are we going to have a Silicon Valley down there?
How has it been received? Really well, as you can imagine. I think, and I certainly have a bit of a perspective in terms of the crossover as well, because I spend quite a bit of time in Oxford too. We have an office down there, and just kind of learning about the different ecosystems. And what's really struck me over the last few years that I've been doing that is the huge opportunity that there is if we capitalise on, colloquially the ARC, or more broadly across, nationally across the different innovation ecosystems that there are. So do I think that if we get that right, could we be the next Silicon Valley? Absolutely, because the technology that we are sort of generating across this country, and the talent that we have across this country is huge. I think it's about marrying that up with the global opportunity and the capital.
When you say if we get that right, in your view, what needs to happen to get it right?
I mean, it's quite a complex, question, because there's so many different parts to it. But what I'll do is probably just go along the lines of the conversations that I've had recently with whether it be founders or the VC side, the investor side, is, we have a great sort of early stage ecosystem. We really have an awful lot of great organizations spinning out, great founded, companies being founded. That's a great space for us. Where we have challenges is scaling those businesses and the capital, frankly, to scale those businesses in the way that's needed. So, for example, I was talking to a surgeon the other day who is also an entrepreneur, has exited his own company. And he was saying, well, even if you're a biotech, that's starting out on the journey, I mean, 2 million as a fundraise is really not going to get you very far. In fact, you may barely wake up that morning and you've kind of used that up. So it's the sort of capital, exposure that we have that is problematic. I don't know if you would agree with that.
Yeah, definitely. We see that with a lot of people that we talk to, and but we're now seeing more international money coming in as well. So like Department of Business and Trade have got a venture capital unit, which I didn't know about a few years ago, and that's bringing venture into the UK, but it's connecting those dots and getting that access. And sometimes I'll see with regional organisations, they think that bringing in money from outside means the business will go outside, which isn't true. Businesses stay where they are if you build that value proposition of why stay here. Money doesn't recognise borders. Investors don't generally care where money goes. They just want great propositions, which boils back down to who's involved, who are the people, and what's that proposition to be there.
That's absolutely right. And I think that kind of lends itself to the number of businesses that we have, for example, that within, let's say, healthcare, who will look to move to the US, but actually still keep their R&D, their IP, the kind of crown jewels, as it were, here in this country.
But when we talk about the need for growth in this country, do we need to unlock the investment within the country?
I mean, personally, I think yes. And I think that there is, Gordon's right, there is an awful lot that we are doing. And, that landscape has already evolved. But I think there is more to be done to incentivise and provide the right infrastructure to allow that, the capital to come into this country at the sort of levels that we need it to.
In your role, when you're talking to founders, you've talked about, if you are dealing with overseas law, as well as your own law, I mean, that must unlock a whole host of issues that they just want the money. Yeah. They're not thinking about the rest of it. And look, I can get X million from there, but hold on a second.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And it's, it is more complex, and that's not just me being a lawyer, but, it genuinely is a complex landscape. And so I think there's always some thought process that needs to go into, okay, but what does that actually genuinely mean from a regulatory point of view, from a tax point of view, for you guys personally as directors? What does that mean for you? And I think that, on the people side, it becomes another layer of complexity, because ultimately, if people are based in other locations, it's likely that the labour laws of those countries are going to apply to them. So, that needs consideration as well. So it seems like we're a much more globalised, workforce economy, which is true. And I think, we'll continue to see that trajectory. But it's really about understanding what comes with that globalization too.
I'm just intrigued, because Gordon wants to chip in. I'm just intrigued when you see one of those really global things, do your eyes light up and go, "Oh, this is a good problem. This is fantastic," or do you go,
I love it.
"Oh my word"?
No, I love it. I love it. It's all part and parcel of that whole nosy understanding where the business is going, what they want to achieve. Because I'm yet to meet a business that isn't thinking globally, either because there's a market opportunity or because there's a talent opportunity or simply because their customer base, is located in another jurisdiction. So there's always that dynamic. And it really does give me, a level of excitement, because what it also allows me to do, and it has allowed me to do, is to learn about not just the kind of legal frameworks in other countries, but the cultural differences that there are. And again, sort of appealing to my nosy nature, it's been really great to do that.
It's interesting. It's the biggest conversation we're hearing now across the whole of the sector, whether that be across all of the sectors, is international growth. And we see businesses in two angles, one of which is it's dead easy. I'll just hire a sales guy or a saleswoman in country X and I'm going to be a global business. Or, oh my God, it's the most complicated, difficult. I'll forget it. I'm not going to do it. And I think it's probably one of the biggest tracks we're going to have in Climb this year is that around how to support businesses through that global journey, because we've seen so many delegations that happen where 10 or 20 companies will go to a country, 9 or 19 of them within an hour realise they shouldn't actually be there, and they're not ready to do that. So all that pre-work before can save, and it's not the cost of whatever $5,000 to go over to Dubai for a week, or it's the time as a founder. You can't dedicate an hour, you can't lose a week because you just don't have that time. So it is a big subject that we're talking around a lot, and people, having done it myself a number of times, you don't realise how complicated it is. You need the right people around you to do it.
Yeah, and I think it's the reason why we've seen, for example, an absolute sort of influx of what we call employers of record, the kind of organisations that will employ people, process payroll for you in other jurisdictions. And, the proposition is very much, well, we take all of that headache off your plate and we'll sort it all out for you. So an awful lot of what we do with our clients when they are thinking about that globalization piece is educating them around smartly using those different ecosystem providers that they've got, and understanding, okay, but how are you going to make sure that through all of that you're protecting your business?
You talk with great passion and very much light up at being in at the ground level with the founders, helping them to build and to build it right. Does your heart sink a little when you deal with that traditional firm where they've got it wrong? It's how they've done it for years, but it hasn't been right, but that's who's employing you and that's what you've got to deal with?
Yeah, I mean, so certainly, I think when I have, for example, a law firm on the other side of a matter, which, you can just smell them a mile off, they just don't understand this space. And I think what's been interesting is seeing how many law firms and sort of jumping on the bandwagon now saying we support startups, it's a very sexy thing to be involved with. But what I say to my founders is, it's about walking the walk, not just talking the talk. And actually that's about experience, and that's about, working with you guys for many, many years to, learn some of the journey with you and to see what some of the pitfalls might be. So yes, it does. When I see that kind of more traditional approach being taken, it does make me sort of put my head in my hands. But ultimately, I see that as an opportunity.
And is that an opportunity that, you've talked a lot about change and how retaining people and how companies are changing, that actually maybe those law firms that you're talking to need to go through that change? I mean, I don't quite know how you point that out to them.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I think, our industry is, a lot of law firms have moved on. And I think the ones that have embraced the kind of agility that they've needed over the years are the ones that stand out, right? They're the ones that everybody would sort of label and go, yeah, you guys operate in that space. But I think that law firms across the piece still need to do an awful lot of modernisation. I think that still, for example, a lot of law firms still operate on the hourly rate model, which, and if I mention that to a founder, you can sort of see their demeanour completely change. So, I think it's about understanding your target audience and making sure that you can adapt to suit them and how they like to work. And I think the law firms of the future and the ones that attract the best lawyers will be the ones that get that right.
And as you see a company grow, I mean, HR is one of those things that's often seen as, for the management. It's not seen for the employees. It should be. That's what it's all about. But it's seen as, for the management. As you watch a company grow, the ones that you're involved with, I'm guessing you can point them along the way. Ones where you've stepped back and you've then had to step back in. Is that where the problem comes? That they just haven't worked out as the company grows and the number of people grows, how to look after them?
Yeah, I think that is a big challenge. And I think that certainly there comes a point of scale where that becomes particularly acute, where a business has, had a few people, but then gets to a point of scale, probably around kind of 50 to 100 employees mark, where actually the infrastructure that they need, including the HR support, is not right. It's not there. It's not where it needs to be in order to then take the business to that next level of scale. So I think that HR and getting that right and bringing that in at the right time and making sure that you're getting the best out of your HR provider is really, really important. And it's part of actually the conversations that we're having on a daily basis with our founders, because you're right, in those early days, it's, management is just handling everything. But I think, that ability to realize when is the right time and what to get out of those individuals is really important. But controversially, I think, my view on the HR piece is that really, and it's probably the same as how I would attribute myself, is that you've got to be an enabler, right? So yes, you are there for the people, but ultimately you have to enable the business to get to where it needs to be by managing the people risks in the right way. I don't know if you agree with that.
Definitely, 100%. And I think taking the team, the employees on that journey, because when you go from, and it is almost overnight, it's almost like becoming a teenager, when you go from being a small business of 20, 30 people, and then you hit that kind of 50, 60, where things just massively change. And what we see in a lot of companies is a lot of people leave at that. If it's not dealt with correctly, and I've suffered this in one of my organisations a long time ago, is we just had this mass exodus because we've gone from, I can phone Gordon and talk to the boss every minute of every day, to suddenly I've got structures and process. So I think working and enabling the business to be able to engage the teams and show them what's going to happen as they scale before that actual date. And of course there'll be people who leave, but that's working in that genuine partnership, because I remember it happening in my first business, and it's scary. You suddenly, one person resigns and then the next day another person resigns, and it's like, what have I done wrong? And I've grown. That's the answer. That's the kind of thing. So yeah, I agree completely, that enabling piece.
So when you sit down with a company, I mean, there's a whole host of things I'm sure you're telling you, but is there a key piece of advice you hear yourself each time when you're sitting down with a founder, with a startup, that it's the one thing that they probably haven't thought of that you think you have to do this?
Yeah, I mean, probably more Gordon's bag than mine, but just thinking about what is your talent strategy for the next year or two, right? Where do you want to be? And then almost working back from that to say, okay, what are the potential challenges to get us there? What could go awry? What have we seen go awry? So I think the single best piece of advice is let's really drill down into the detail of that. And then after that, it's a slightly more boring answer, which is what is the compliance infrastructure that you have in place behind it? But it's a really important one. Do you have a shareholders agreement? Do you have founder service agreements? And those things do matter. They don't need to be war and peace in those early days. They just need to do the job, because the likelihood is if you go for your first fundraise, your investors will come in and say, no, this is what we want in place. But, having something, I think, is better than having nothing. And, so it's about getting them to understand that part of the jigsaw as well.
And when it goes right, when you get that $1 billion offer and suddenly, you're like, wow, what do I do with this? I think 100%, because motivations of the shareholders will change at any one point. So, and I think that's one of the things that why we work well together, is that's what you're really good at, is taking them on that next three, or having a strategy, not just thinking, I'll just put I've got the shareholders agreement, I've got this, tick, tick, tick. It's very much, this is where you have the destination in mind.
Yeah, what's really interesting is I engaged with a company recently in the biotech space, and they'd used another law firm, not naming any names, to provide them with the documentation that they needed on the people side. And I was talking to the founder, really interesting conversation, just understanding a bit more about the business. And then I asked him the question, okay, you've got these documents. What do you want to do in the next year when it comes to your people? Who are you going to be hiring? Who are you going to need? Where are they going to come from? And he looked at me and sort of said, nobody's asked me that before on the people side. And I think what's really interesting, and I've had these conversations over several years actually, is, as a breed, I think a lot of employment lawyers, traditional employment lawyers, are quite reactive and are quite, support function driven. So, we're there to help with the transactional support. We're there to, just provide you with whatever document it is that you need. But certainly what I really pride myself on in terms of the team that I have around me is that we will always ask that question and we'll always care about the answer to that question. And that will allow us to frame, firstly, what we help our founders with in those early days, but then also how we build that relationship going forward.
But from an investor's perspective, if you've every company on the planet probably has a product strategy and they have a financial strategy. If you have a people strategy, you're in the real top end of the upper quartile, because from an external perspective of somebody coming in, you can look at that from an investment perspective and go, you actually got the capability to deliver what I'm paying you to deliver. And people forget about that all the time. So I think you're absolutely right.
Yeah. And you've got, that's the other angle to it. You've thought about the way to protect my investment as well, and I think that's important, because ultimately if you're investing in a business that, is very much people driven, for example, professional services, you want to understand that your investment is properly protected. And that's the other angle that we come at it from.
It's interesting because I don't think most people think lawyers talk like you talk. They talk about the law, they talk about, your contracts and things like that. But all the way through this, it's just been people for you.
Yeah, it's absolutely right. And I have, I understand a little bit about the other areas. The way one of my colleagues describes it is, and I understand enough to be dangerous. But certainly, the bit that really motivates me and the bit that sort of gets me out of bed in the morning is that people part, and helping my businesses to understand how they can get the best out of their people and how they can ultimately retain them.
And your own journey's been quite one. Do you ever look back and just think, wow, that it's been quite a journey so far?
Yeah, I do. I mean, it's interesting because I get different perspectives on that. So I was speaking to one of my founders not too long ago, actually. And if I look at sort of my career journey, it's been one place pretty much. Obviously, we had a merger in a couple of years ago, but it's still the same firm in that sense. And, he sort of just looked at me and went, you've been there how long? It was very much that sort of question. And so it made me take a step back and think, well, actually, I haven't really, moved around, etc. But for me, what's been great is, as you've identified, it's been a journey, and there's been twists and turns, and there's been pivots, and there's been not getting things quite right and having to start again. So in a weird way, notwithstanding the fact I've not actually started up or scaled my own business, I sort of feel like I've had some opportunity to experience some of that stuff. And now with, having a team as well, it brings that additional perspective to the table as well.
You have your own people.
Yeah, I do.
Let's hope they're happy people, because if they're not, so. Then something's going very wrong. Yeah. Kim, thank you so much for your time. It's been absolutely fascinating. Join us again for the next Conversations at the Summit.